My name is Adele Chambers, and I have spent the better part of my life being invisible. Not in a sad way, in the way that women my age tend to become invisible, quietly, gradually, like fog lifting off the lake in the morning. You don't notice when it happens. One day you're a mother, a wife, a person with appointments and opinions and a seat at the table. Then your husband passes, your children move to their own cities, and you become the woman at the end of the hall who always smells faintly of Earl Grey. I am 67 years old. I live in a two-bedroom apartment in the West End of Hamilton, Ontario, in a building that was probably lovely in 1987 and has been trying to convince itself of that ever since. The carpet in the lobby is a deep burgundy that hides everything and tells nothing. The elevator groans on the way up to the 4th floor. My unit faces the parking lot, which my daughter always apologizes for when she visits. But I've never minded. I like knowing what's coming and going. After my husband passed, it will be 4 years this March. I needed something to do with my mornings. Grief has a way of making 5 a.m. feel unbearable if you don't have somewhere to put it. My daughter wanted me to take a pottery class. My son-in-law suggested I get a dog. Instead, I found a job. Not a demanding one. I work 3 mornings a week at the records office of the Hamilton Public Library System. Archiving donated materials, cataloging estates, the quiet work that no one notices until someone needs a document from 1962, and you're the only person who knows where it is. I took the position 8 months after Terrence died, and it saved my life in the small, ordinary way that work sometimes does. The shift starts at 7 in the morning. The bus from my stop runs at 6:40, and it is always cold. Hamilton winters are not gentle. They come in off the lake with a kind of indifference, the wind finding every gap in your coat, your scarf, the space between your collar and your jaw. I am not a woman who complains about weather. I grew up in Cape Breton. I know what cold is. But I am 67, and my knees have opinions now, and the platform at King and James is exposed on 3 sides. That is why I started taking the overnight cleaning crew's cart elevator instead of the main one, coming down to the building lobby around 6:15 to wait in the warm. That is how I met Earl. His full name is Earl Whitfield, and he has worked nights for a building maintenance company contracted to clean several downtown Hamilton properties, including mine, for 11 years. He is quiet in the way that people are quiet when they have learned that no one is listening anyway. He is perhaps 55, though his eyes look older. He wears a gray uniform with a small logo on the chest, and he always smells like the industrial pine cleaner he uses on the lobby floors, which I have come to associate entirely with the feeling of safety. The first morning I came down early and sat on the bench in the lobby, the decorative bench by the mailboxes that no one ever sits on. Earl was buffing the floor near the door. He looked up, startled. I apologized for being in his way. He said I wasn't. That was the entire conversation. I came back the next Monday, and the one after that. By the 3rd week, I started bringing 2 cups of tea from my apartment. I make a proper pot every morning, loose leaf, nothing fancy, but steeped correctly, which matters. I put the 2nd cup in an insulated travel mug I found at the back of a drawer, and I brought it down at 6:15 and set it on the mailbox ledge near where Earl parks his cart. He didn't say much the first time, just looked at the cup, then at me, and said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I said. "I made too much." I hadn't made too much. I made exactly enough for 2. But that seemed like the right thing to say. We developed a rhythm, Earl and I, over the following months. He would be finishing the lobby by 6:15, and I would come down with the tea, and we would sit, him on his equipment cart, me on the decorative bench, for about 10 minutes before he moved on to the parkade level, and I gathered my coat and bag for the bus. We talked about small things. The weather, the building, A news story we'd both half heard. He told me once that he had a son in Guelph he didn't see much anymore. I told him Terence and I had wanted to move to Nova Scotia before he got sick, and how sometimes I still thought about it. He was a good listener, the best kind, the kind who doesn't try to fix anything, just lets the words sit between you. I don't think either of us would have called it a friendship exactly, but it was something real in the way that small morning routines become real, by repetition, by the weight of consistency, by showing up. I want to be precise about this because what came later only makes sense if you understand what came before. We weren't close in the way that people who share their whole lives are close. We were close in the way that you are close to someone you trust, not because you have tested them, but because something in you simply knows. It was a Tuesday in November when everything changed. I remember the exact date because I had just finished cataloging a collection of donated documents from an estate in Ancaster, a retired judge, and his papers were meticulous, organized by year, going back to 1971. It had been deeply satisfying work, the kind that fills the whole morning without your noticing, and I had stayed 20 minutes late to finish a box before the weekend. I took the bus home as usual, the 6:40 from James North. I was tired in a pleasant way, the way you're tired after doing something that uses your mind properly. I had a bag with me, library materials I'd been given permission to review at home, photocopies of some historical property records the archivist wanted my opinion on. Nothing sensitive, just old paper and old names. The bus let me off at my usual stop at 7:19. The sky was already dark. November in Hamilton, the light disappears without apologizing. I walked the half block to my building, nodded to the overnight security panel at the entrance, and took the elevator up to 4. My unit is 4-7. The hallway on my floor is narrow and lit with those flat LED panels that make everything look slightly clinical. I find it comforting, actually. You can see clearly. No shadows. I had my keys out before I reached my door, the way I always do. Muscle memory from 40 years of living alone at various points and from Terence always teasing me for it. You'd have the car unparked before you even got to the lot, he used to say. I put the key in the lock. It didn't feel right. I know how my lock feels. I know the exact resistance of it, the slight drag before it catches. This was different. The key turned too smoothly, like the lock had been recently disengaged and re-engaged, like someone had been in my apartment. I stood in the hallway for a moment. I told myself I was being foolish. 67 years old and jumping at door locks, I pushed the door open about 6 inches. The lamp in my living room was on. I always turn the lamp off when I leave. Always. Terence used to call me obsessive about it, and maybe I am, but I turned that lamp off at 6:35 that morning. I remembered doing it. I was standing by the coat closet, and I reached back and turned it off. It was on. I pulled the door shut without going in. I didn't think about it. Something in my body made the decision before my mind did. That animal thing that lives underneath reason and has been keeping us alive since before we had words for danger. I walked back to the elevator. I pressed the lobby button. My hands were steady, which surprised me later. Earl was still in the building. He does the parkade on Tuesday nights, and it takes until nearly 7:30. I found him by the storage cages on the lower level, loading the cleaning cart back up. He looked up when he heard my footsteps and seemed to understand immediately that something was wrong. I don't know what my face was doing. Something, clearly. "What happened?" he said. Not a question. The way you say it when you already know the shape of the thing, even if not the specifics. I told him about the lamp, about the lock. I heard myself saying it, and I thought, I will sound like a paranoid woman. I will sound like someone who forgot she left her lamp on. Earl did not look at me like that. He listened, and when I finished, he said, "Stay here," and he picked up his phone. What he told me next was not something I expected. There is a man who lives in 422. His name is Dale Pittman, and he has been in that unit for about 7 months. I had seen him perhaps 4 times, in the elevator, at the mailboxes. We had exchanged the nods that neighbors in a building like mine exchange. Nothing more. He was perhaps late 40s, kept to himself. Seemed ordinary in every way that a person can seem ordinary. Earl told me that for the past 3 weeks he had noticed Pittman behaving strangely in the evenings, watching the elevator panel, standing near the mailboxes past midnight. Twice, Earl had seen him in the 4th-floor hallway near my unit when no one should have had any reason to be there that late. Earl had logged it informally in his company's incident notes, but hadn't been sure whether to escalate it. He hadn't wanted to accuse a resident of a building he was contracted to clean based on a feeling. But he had noticed. He had been paying attention, not because anyone told him to, but because after 11 years of cleaning the same buildings, you learn what belongs and what doesn't. "I saw him go up," Earl said quietly, "about 40 minutes ago. He came back down maybe 15 minutes later. I thought about stopping him, but I didn't have a reason that would hold up." My chest was very still. That's the only way I can describe it. Not tight, still. Like everything had gone quiet inside me. "Has he ever said anything to you?" Earl asked. I thought carefully. "There was a Tuesday about a month ago," I said. "He held the elevator for me. He asked me about my work bag, what was in it. I said library materials. He didn't ask anything else." Earl looked at my bag, at the papers inside it. He was quiet for a moment. "Is anything in there about property?" he asked. I stared at him. "Because," he said carefully, "I don't know how to say this without it sounding strange, but I know that man has been in some kind of trouble. My cousin works with the city bylaw office. Pittman's name came up in something. I don't know what exactly. I just know the name." I sat down on the concrete edge of the parking barrier. My legs had finally decided they were done pretending. I am not a dramatic person. I have never been one for catastrophizing or drawing conclusions before evidence supports them. I worked for 22 years as an administrative manager for a civil engineering firm, and before that I spent 8 years in records management for the city of Hamilton. I know how to read documents. I know how to find what a person is trying to hide inside a file. I thought about the Ancaster estate papers I had been working on all week. The retired judge's collection included not only his personal correspondence, but several boxes of documents from his work with a local heritage property trust, an informal advisory role he had held for many years before his death. Some of those documents involved contested property assessments, applications that had been filed, appealed, revised, names of applicants, names of objectors. One of those names in a 2019 appeal document I had cataloged that very morning was a D. Pittman. The property in question was a small commercial lot on the East Mountain that had been assessed for redevelopment. I had thought nothing of it at the time. It was a common enough situation in the Heritage Trust files: contested assessments, delayed approvals, frustrated applicants. I hadn't even noted it consciously. It had simply passed through my hands the way hundreds of names pass through your hands when you do archival work. But someone might have thought that I had. Someone who saw me carrying library materials, who knew I worked with estate documents, who did not know exactly what I had access to and was not willing to take the risk of finding out. I called my daughter from the parking garage. She answered on the second ring. She always does, that girl, as though some part of her is always slightly ready for the call. I told her where I was and what had happened. She was at my building in 38 minutes, which is faster than the drive from her house in Waterdown should allow, and I chose not to think too hard about how fast she drove. Earl waited with me. He sat on his equipment cart, and I sat on the parking barrier, and we drank the rest of the thermos of tea he kept in his cleaning cart, cheap tea bags, the kind that come in the giant box from Costco, steeped too long and slightly bitter, and it was one of the best cups of tea I have ever had in my life. We didn't talk much. There was a kind of quiet between us that had weight to it, the good kind of weight, like a hand on your shoulder. The police came. My daughter came. The building superintendent came in his slippers, deeply unhappy about all of it. Dale Pittman was found still in the building, not in his unit, but in the stairwell on the 3rd floor, which the officer who spoke to me later described as not ideal, in a tone that suggested it was considerably worse than that. What they found when they searched his unit was not a violent person's arsenal. It was a frightened person's collection, printed property documents, handwritten notes, a timeline of my building exits and entrances that he had apparently assembled over several weeks. He had become convinced, through some chain of reasoning I still do not entirely follow, that documents in my possession could affect the appeal of his property assessment, that I was a threat to something he had been fighting for years. He was wrong, of course. The documents I was working with were historical, not active. They could not have affected any current proceeding. He had been afraid of a shadow, but he had been in my apartment. He had looked through my bag, or tried to, and then replaced everything and left. The police found no evidence he had intended physical harm. But intent is a strange thing to establish, and I have stopped trusting it as a measure of how frightened I was. My daughter stayed with me for a week. She slept on the pull-out in the 2nd bedroom and made enormous pots of soup and pretended not to be watching me from the corner of her eye at all times. My son-in-law drove up on the weekend with the grandchildren, who are 4 and 7 and exhausting in the most restorative way possible. I went back to work after 10 days. The archivist, a kind and precise woman named, well, she knows who she is, had arranged for the Ancaster estate documents to be transferred to a secure holding facility until the police had finished their review. When I returned, she gave me a new box and said, "Ready?" And I said yes, and we got on with it. I still work the same 3 mornings a week. I still take the 6:40 bus. I still come down at 6:15 to wait in the lobby. Earl is still there on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights. He finishes the lobby by 6:15, and I bring 2 cups of tea. A few weeks after everything happened, I asked him, not for the first time, but for the first time since, why he had started watching, why he had logged it, why he had paid attention to a man he had no particular reason to suspect. He was quiet for a moment, the way he gets quiet when he's deciding whether to say something. "My son," he said finally. "We don't talk much anymore. His choice, and I understand it. I wasn't around enough when he was young, and that's the truth of it. But I think about him. I think about him. I think about whether someone is watching out for him, somewhere. While someone notices when something isn't right." He looked at his coffee cup. I'd started alternating, tea for me, coffee for him, the way things evolve when you pay attention. "I guess I just figure," he said, "that if I keep noticing things, maybe somewhere, someone is noticing things for him too." I didn't say anything. Sometimes the right response to something true is to let it be true without adding to it. I will tell you what I have learned from being 67 and living alone and working with the records of other people's lives. I have learned that most of the protection we have comes from people who are not paid to protect us. It comes from the person who buffs the lobby floor at 6 in the morning and notices when something doesn't belong. It comes from the habit of attention, which is itself a form of care. I brought Earl tea every Monday and Tuesday and Thursday for 8 months because I had made too much. That is the story I told, and it was almost true. The truer version is that I was lonely in the particular way that widows are lonely, and that kindness gave me somewhere to put it, and that I needed the 10 minutes in the lobby as much as I needed the bus. What I didn't know, what you never know when you choose to be kind to someone, is that 10 minutes and a cup of tea can become the thing that saves you. Not because of the tea, because of the person who drank it and, in doing so, became someone who would be paying attention when it mattered. Be kind, not because you expect something back, not because someone is watching. Be kind because it makes you a person who shows up, and showing up is very nearly everything. I keep thinking about the cup of coffee I handed Earl that first Thursday, the one where I switched from tea to coffee because I had finally paid enough attention to know what he actually liked. It was such a small thing, the kind of thing you don't remember doing usually. But I think that's exactly where it starts, in the noticing and the willingness to adjust, to actually see the person in front of you instead of the idea of them. What happened to me in November was frightening. I won't pretend otherwise. But the more I sit with it, the more I understand that the outcome wasn't luck. It was a long chain of small choices made by two people who had no particular reason to invest in each other and chose to anyway. Earl made a choice every single night to pay attention, not because his job required it. His job required clean floors and empty bins. The attention was something he gave on his own, out of some quiet sense of responsibility he had developed over 11 years of being in buildings where no one really sees the person holding the mop. He noticed Pittman because he had trained himself to notice things that didn't fit. That's not instinct. That's discipline. It's the kind of clear-eyed awareness that you build slowly, by choosing to be present when it would be easier not to be. I made choices too. The tea, the 10 minutes, the willingness to sit on a decorative bench that wasn't meant for sitting and talk to a man I had no social obligation to talk to. I did it because I was lonely and because something in me has always believed that the people who make a place function, the ones who show up in the dark and the cold and do the work no one applauds, deserve to be acknowledged. That belief didn't come from nowhere. It came from decades of being the person in the office who remembered everyone's coffee order, who sent the card when someone's parent died, who understood that a workplace is only as decent as the smallest kindness it makes room for. What I understand now, more than I did before, is that character isn't what you have when things are going well. It's what you've been building quietly in all the ordinary moments no one's watching. Earl's steadiness in that parking garage, the way he stayed calm, asked the right questions, pieced together what he knew without panic, that didn't come from the crisis. It came from who he already was. The crisis just revealed it. And resilience, the kind that actually holds, isn't the dramatic thing we imagine it to be. It's not surviving the terrible moment. It's all the mornings before that moment, where you got up, made the tea, took the bus, did the work, showed up for the small life you have. That's what carries you through when the small life suddenly becomes something else entirely. I am 67 years old. I live in a building with burgundy carpet and a groaning elevator and a lobby that Earl Whitfield keeps spotless 3 nights a week. I work 3 mornings a week with old paper and old names. I am, in most respects, invisible. But I have learned that invisible and unprotected are not the same thing. You build your protection slowly, over years, through the quality of your attention and the consistency of your decency. And sometimes, when you need it most, it comes back to you in the form of a man on an equipment cart who has been paying attention too. Bring the tea. Notice the person. Keep showing up. The text is, as far as I can tell, the whole of it.